Hello everybody, welcome to the Wonky Angle, where I talk about electronic music, both new and old, and today I'm talking about the new box set from Kraftwerk, 3D, the Catalogue. Okay, so this is quite literally a big one. Only a few months ago, Kraftwerk surprised everyone with not only a new release in 2017, but I think we can turn off the obviously fake 3D effect. Thank you. Kraftwerk surprised everyone with not only a new release in 2017, but their biggest new release to date. It was a box set of their entire discography, post-Ralf and Florian, entirely reworked from live sets, but with crowd noise removed. Autobahn, Radioactivity, Trans-Europe Express, Man Machine, Computer World, Technopop, The Mix, and Tour de France. That was a lot to swallow in and of itself. And the 3D aspect was interesting too. It seemed they were going to mix it so that there was some kind of 3D stereo mix on headphones, especially highlighting the mix as headphone surround 3D mix. Now on one hand, I have mentioned that I have not been looking forward to the prospect of any new releases from Kraftwerk, especially given that Ralf Witter is the only remaining original member. Not even Florian Schneider's there anymore. But I was actually really excited to hear all of these reworkings. I figured, well, they're not trying to add to their legacy anymore, and I think that's a respectful way of looking at it all. I went out of my way to avoid listening to this, since I figured I was going to like the whole thing quite a lot, and thought maybe it might even be good enough for me to stop recommending the mix altogether. I was a little worried that I wouldn't have much to say on the subject of this box set, but I excitedly jumped into this massive collection regardless. How'd it turn out? Okay. There are a grand total of 69 tracks on this thing. Yes, I know, haha, 69. And out of those 69, how many would I see as a possible replacement to any already released versions of these tracks? I would have to say 0. Yeah, and that includes the mix as well. I would not mark this box set as a replacement for the mix, and will continue to recommend that one as is. Mind you, that's not to say 3D the Catalogue was bad, but I have a lot of mixed thoughts on basically all of these reworkings. I'm all over the place on the whole thing, and my first impression was one of general disappointment. Granted, there's also part of me that feels like, well, by the same token, we are talking about now listening to a new Kraftwerk release that has 0 nostalgia factor. And yeah, it is kinda weird to be listening to something from them that I haven't already been listening to for several years, so I guess that could be a part of it, but... Okay, let's just start off with the arrangements first and foremost. There's 8 discs and a ton to say. So let's start off with Autobahn. Now, Autobahn itself is a closer step towards the original version than it is to the mix version. And yeah, I think I do still personally prefer the mix version. But yeah, this feels like kind of a compromise, honestly. It's not as long and prog rocky as the original, but it's not as concise or tight as the mix or minimum maximum versions. I mean, granted, it's still Autobahn and is still enjoyable, but it doesn't have quite the same heights for me as either the original or the mix version. If you're going to glorify the original, I mean, least you could do is throw on, like, one Florian Schneider flute riff, but, not like they've done that for basically any version after 1974. And that whole compromise thing is a running theme on this entire box set, let me warn you. The rest of the Autobahn album has we got a surprisingly intense and engaging remix of Kometenmelodie 1. Really like that. And there's also a disappointingly weak remix of Kometenmelodie 2. Just, and nearly non-existent Mitternacht and Morgen Spaziergang tacked out at the end, almost what feels like out of obligation. And as for Radioactivity, the track itself did throw me off at first, as it starts off with Japanese lyrics. I didn't know this before, but after the Fukushima Daiichi, or however you say that, the nuclear disaster, they changed the track's lyrics to reflect that. Also, I can't remember where I read this, but, of course, the person who helped them get the Japanese translation of this song was, of course, none other than Ryuichi Sakamoto. So, yeah, that's cool. Otherwise, that track's not that much different. Radioland, I think, actually was an improvement from the original, in that now it's got more bass resonance, and it seems much more obvious that it's trying to be creepy on purpose. Like, there's one part where the vocoders sound like the big organ swell that kind of calls over to say yes is close to the edge a little bit for me. Airwaves, on the other hand, is not really a step up from the original. This version is suddenly super fast and spastic and no longer particularly danceable, and for some reason I get the urge to sing Donna Summer's I Feel Love over it. Alright, the other big notable things about this disc, we got Radio Stars, in which Ralf Hütter is very, very obviously just speaking on top of the original unchanged master of the track, which is another recurring thing all over this box set. You hear the original masters from the original albums placed throughout. And I was also quite pissed off by Om Sweet Om, which cut off early right before my favorite part of the track, before it like actually starts to get into gear. Like, come on. That was dumb and a massive disappointment. Alright, then Trans-Europe Express. Didn't surprise me with Title Suite itself, though, you know, Metal on Metal had particularly satisfying metal bangs. But, you know, the rest was interesting. Europe Endless was a huge disappointment as well. Not only did they put it like right next to Franz Schubert and not even try to mix them together, despite the fact that it probably could have been pretty easy to mix them. But the track itself, like the new Kometenmelodie 2 mix, it was just way too mellow, didn't even remotely make me want to get out of my seat. Just, But on the other hand, both the Hall of Mirrors and Showroom Dummies of all tracks were fantastic. They sounded great and even more intense than the originals. Showroom Dummies even surprised me with that part when they break the glass. Like, the shattering was a lot more violent, and they even did this little thing where they set the breaking glass sounds to match the rhythm of the track. And it even ends with a reprisal of the melody of Mitternacht. So that was a lot more interesting. Did not anticipate enjoying either of those tracks as much as I did. Next up, The Man Machine, which was unimpressive across the board. Well, okay, the title track was pretty fun, and the Robots was rearranged to make it more interesting, but you know, the rest, it was fine, but it didn't really stick out to me. I'd much rather listen to the originals. Not unenjoyable, but, yeah, unimpressive. Then Computer World. Okay, here's the thing about the rest of the box set so far. Like, one thing that has been continually bothering me is the lack of strong percussion. It feels like what they've been trying to do here is actually push against the mix and demodernize everything, often by, like I said, taking elements from the original masters, usually the percussion tracks they take from the original versions, but they also, like, never go all the way with it. Tracks that were from the mix always retain minor elements from those versions. That's kind of what I mean by a lot of this feels like a compromise. It feels like they're trying to simultaneously please fans of the mix and haters of the mix at the same time, and you know, it's not the most effective, I don't think. People who hate the mix will be like, well, they still follow those old arrangements and sound too 90s for me, ugh. But people like me, who still like the mix, will be disappointed at the percussion and its lack of groove or danceability. And this is taken to the forefront on Computer Love. I was really looking forward to this mix, as I was hoping it would address my main issue with the mix version, in that the bass line was too weak, and while it does in fact address this issue and the bass line is much warmer and more satisfying, the trade-off is that we also get the percussion track from the original, and that, like I said, makes it much less danceable than the mix version. I think this revelation did show me that I probably still prefer the mix version over the original, but whatever. Now, the whole mixing and original masters thing, though, does come off much better on Pocket Calculator. As many people may remember, I was not fond of the mix version of that track, but this new version, again, takes elements from the far superior original, and it all comes together in a very nice and enjoyable fashion. Also, numbers in Computer World themselves were pretty fun too, and I like how they do a subtle callback to Computer World 2 at the end. But then there was Technopop, and oh geez, this was probably the most irritating disc of them all. First of all, it started with Electric Cafe, which was weird right off the bat. Like, a lot of these reworkings just have all the tracks out of order, but that in particular was weird. But then the telephone call and house phone were even worse, mainly thanks to the former being instrumental. I mean, I kind of get why they did it. The telephone call, I forgot to mention, My Electric Cafe is the only Kraftwerk track to be sung by Karl Bartos. And obviously Karl Bartos is no longer in Kraftwerk, so there's no Karl Bartos here either, but I mean, come on. He didn't even sound that much different from Ralf Hutter. You could have easily gotten away with it. Maybe there's some lawsuit about this, I don't know. And possibly worse is the fact that they don't link together Boing Boom Chock, Technopop, and Music Non-Stop. There's awkward silence in between each of these tracks where obviously they should have just stuck them back to back. I'm not even bothered by the fact that they cut down Technopop to like 2 minutes. I mean, Music Non-Stop is basically the only track on this entire box set that is longer than the original version. But come on, not linking them together at all? Are you serious with this? Okay, now that brings us to the mix disc itself. I admittedly did not have high expectations for this, given that they're rehashing tracks from the rest of this box set, but actually, this disc was easily the highlight of the entire box set. Sure, the arrangements aren't actually any different from the previous ones, but like that above-mentioned headphone surround 3D mix actually lives up to its name. Really does make you feel like you're there in a concert hall, and the reverberation somehow feels much more complex and effective than the rest of the box set. I mean, they did kind of do the whole reverberation thing on the other versions, but it felt like more like you were just in a recording studio with the other ones. This one, it feels like you're in a much bigger space. Not to mention, perhaps because of this, it just overall sounds a lot better. The percussion is a bit more pronounced now that all the other elements are given their own space, and other little details like them actually bothering to link together Boing Boom Chock, Technopop, and Music Non-Stop so that they actually flow together. Why they didn't do that in the main Technopop disc, I have no idea. Oh, and the disc also ends with Planet of Visions. Probably the best version of this track I've heard to date, mixing it with elements of both the original mixes of Expo 2000, although, obviously without them saying Expo 2000, of course. But yeah, just mixing all these different versions, and it's... wow. That track was awesome. And that finally leaves Tour de France. The main highlight is, of course, the fact that they now combine the original single with the suite from the album. Although, of course, the edited down live versions from Minimum Maximum, but yeah, still, that was pretty awesome. They transitioned really well, and the awesome intro from the Minimum Maximum version of the regular single is there. I do have one major complaint though, and it's that for some reason, of all the tracks to edit down, they picked Chrono? Like, it's not edited down from the album version, it's edited down from the Minimum Maximum version, which is only like 1.5 minutes. Why did they feel the need to edit that one down? And like, it's really obvious at the point in which they did kind of edit it, and you can hear the crossfading, and it's just like, that's really distracting. But, you know, otherwise, the whole thing's pretty cool. But I'll tell you what the real highlight on this entire disc was, though, and it's surprisingly aerodynamic. This is probably the best iteration I've heard of this track to date. It's more energetic, it's more atmospheric, also feels like it's got a busier mix with more sounds going around, and it doesn't run too long or cut down too short. It's just a surprisingly fantastic version of this track. The other nitpick I have with this disc, though, is that we close everything out with La Forme and Regeneration, which, while a perfectly fine rendition of that track, it still retains the energy of the original, but I kind of came out of that one feeling unsatisfied and expecting the Tour de France single to show up again. I don't think it works as well as an ending to this entire box set, especially when I'm not used to it being an ending of the album itself. So that's all my thoughts on the material itself on 3D the Catalogue. So that leaves the question of whether I recommend checking out this box set, how much it changes my recommendations or overall perspective on Kraftwerk. So, okay, first of all, I do think I got enough entertainment out of this box set to recommend it to fans. It's clearly well constructed and well produced and worth any fan's time. Sure, I wasn't really impressed by a lot of the tracks I was expecting to be impressed by, and vice versa, but I think in the end I can categorize 3D the Catalogue as its own thing worth checking out separate from all their previous stuff. as well as the mixer minimum maximum, all have their appeal separate from this. Granted, you may remember that I mentioned in my previous video discussing minimum maximum that when I listen to that nowadays, I tend to come out of it a little sick of Kraftwerk. And that problem is way worse here. After listening to this box set twice over and going over particular tracks while typing up the review, I am now quite eager to finish up this discography review. Although by the same token, I suppose that's also to be expected given that it's an 8-disc box set that runs over 4 hours long and is not recommended in one sitting in the first place. Now there is the question as to whether or not I view this as an embarrassment to Kraftwerk given how little issue I saw with their legacy so far and figured they ought to leave it alone. I suppose in some ways, yeah. There's definitely a part of me that would have preferred just a plain old new album instead of this. This stuff was a lot more fascinating to me from a mixing standpoint than it was from an arrangement or straight musical standpoint. And maybe another Kraftwerk album at this point wouldn't be that bad, even without Florian. But, you know, 3D the Catalogue wasn't bad either. I don't see myself ever listening to the whole thing in one go ever again. Or there's probably a whole bunch of stuff I'm just gonna straight take off my iPod. But, you know, there were plenty of choice moments that turned out to be pretty fun, and like I said, Disc 7 was more than worth the price of admission, but I think it's best left up for fans to decide how they feel about it. I think it's alright, it's not a replacement for any of their previous releases, but hey, if there's any super huge Kraftwerk fans itching for a near 5-hour marathon of their favorite band, now they have it. And yeah, no numerical rating on this one either. But of course, this is all just my opinion. You can feel free to disagree with it, but I'd like to hear your thoughts, so leave the comments in the comment thing down there. But yeah, that's pretty much it. That's all for today. See you next time.